service were you in town?
I'm a career infantry officer. Originally joined in 1978 as an enlisted soldier with the Connecticut Army National Guard. Then I went to the officer candidate school, the state officer candidate school at camp, now called Camp Niantic, Connecticut, in the United States Army.
What was your highest rank?
After completing nearly 30 years of service, I was retired as an 06 colonel and a brigadier general, state militia, retired Connecticut.
Let's go back to when you first joined the Army or the National Guard. What year was it, and tell me why you enlisted.
I joined in 1978. I graduated from high school in 1975. It was in the middle of a terrible recession. There weren't a lot of jobs out there. My family was involved in a construction company, and I thought that I would naturally follow in everyone's footsteps. I'm originally from a little town in Connecticut called Sandy Hook, and I'm a product of Sandy Hook School, and my family, my extended family, and all of my relatives went to Sandy Hook School, and Sandy Hook School wasn't even on the map until a couple of years ago during the tragedy of 2013. So I graduated in '75. I wanted to immediately join the Army right after high school, and I signed up with a couple of friends. One by one, they dropped out, and I went to work. I went to work swinging a hammer, and decided that that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So from '75 to, and of course there was a girl involved, as there normally is, and that didn't work out, but thankfully that didn't work out. So in 1978, I made the plunge, solo plunge, because I wanted money for college, I wanted a career, I wanted to be trained without having to spend money for college, and I wanted to do something in construction. Something in the construction field. So I joined the Connecticut Army National Guard as a combat engineer, and specifically in the area of surveying. I was an 82 Bravo, which was construction surveyor, and I went through about 6 months of training to do that. Came back to Connecticut and found out that I couldn't really get a job as a construction surveyor, and back into the construction field and the construction ranks until for the next several years. And during that time, I used that as an opportunity to start college, started as a non-traditional student in a community college, get my associate's degree, and then use all of those credits to transfer that to a bachelor's degree, and then eventually that turned into 2 master's degrees. All of it paid for by the United States Army, which I'm very, very grateful for. And even at the end of my career, I was still going to college. I'm a graduate of the United States Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, with a master's degree in national security and strategic studies. So education is why I originally joined the Army. I remained as an M-Day soldier, and during that time I took advantage of everything that the Army could give me as far as professional development. I went through officer candidate school, and from there I was commissioned as an infantry officer in 1981, and from there I went to the infantry officer's basic course at Fort Benning, Georgia in residence. And then shortly after that, I went to the infantry officer's advanced course in Fort Benning in residence as well. And during that time, I used the opportunities to be the best infantry officer that I could be. I was awarded the Expert Infantryman's Badge, a grueling test where 63 started and 2 finished over the course of about 8 months. The Air Assault School and the Senior Rappel Master course. And again, education not only on the civilian side, but education on the military side as well. So, and then I became a full-time AGR soldier, Active Guard and Reserve, in the 85, 86 timeframe, and I remained as an AGR soldier through to my retirement at the end of 2008.
Tom, back when you first joined in 1978, what were your duties as a National Guardsman and what were you responsible for?
Yeah, I'm also very proud to say that I joined the military as a private E1, and I'm very proud to say that I progressed through the ranks from private E1 all the way through colonel. So I guess I would be considered a Mustang, and a lot of soldiers have done this, but there's so many that went through another form of commissioning, either through one of the service academies or through ROTC, who didn't really experience what it was like to be a lowest level enlisted soldier. So I've been there. I've slept in the barracks and dug the foxholes and picked up the cigarette butts and done everything that's needed to, and done the KP stuff. And so it's very important that when I became a commander that I would still have the connection with the soldiers that I was commanding, because I was one of them. My duties and responsibilities as an enlisted soldier when I first joined was started out as a combat engineer, and then after being a combat engineer, I was a construction engineer. But then, not too long after I returned from training, and this is post-Vietnam. This is a post-Vietnam Army with a lot of rebuilding to do, and very poor equipment, very poor infrastructure, very poor discipline. This was an army still on the mend. This was an army that was brought to the lowest depths, and we had a long way to go before we were the professional army, that Cold War army that I served with so proudly beginning in 1990 and all the way through to my retirement. We had a long way to go with rebuilding. So there was, I'm not going to say rampant drug use, but there was a lot of drug use. There was a lot of alcoholism that was, especially in the National Guard, it was known for, being I don't want to use the term good old boy club, but I will. And it was used, a lot of part-time soldiers, not professional in my estimation, would drink and use drugs and not maintain discipline, and gave the Guard and Reserves a really bad name back in the 70s and 80s. I thought, shortly after my training in the enlisted ranks, I thought that I could do it better than those over me. And that's when I took the step to go to officer candidate school.
What year was that?
In 1980, I was accepted and was enrolled in officer candidate school at then Camp Mescal or Camp Weicker. The National Guard camps in Connecticut were named after the sitting governors at the time. Now it's called Camp Niantic, thankfully, so I don't have to remember all of these governors' names. So I was...
What was that OCS training like?
Yeah, OCS was tough. OCS was extremely tough. It was mentally tough. It was physically tough. It was, instead of going to your unit to train as a combat engineer, you would go to Camp Weicker or Camp Mescal for 1 week in a month, and you're pretty much physically and mentally abused for that very, very, very long weekend. I never thought that I would make it through, let alone be commissioned. I use a story, and I tell people that while my classmates who were a lot more experienced than me, I was just a kid, a lot more experienced than me, they were talking about what battalions they wanted to command as lieutenant colonels. And I was trying to decide whether I had another 10 push-ups left in me. So I was trying to make it through the weekend, and trying to be as inconspicuous as possible so I wouldn't be a subject for attack. Attack is a technical officer who would teach, advise, and counsel the students all the way through the program. So, but they were sadistic bastards, but we made it through, and we started with a class of 63. We graduated 17, and most of us, of the graduates, did very, very successful in our military careers because of the toughness of our training. And
do you remember any of your instructors?
I remember a guy named Captain Francis, Captain Smith, Captain Blake. All of these folks went on to become lieutenant colonels and colonels. I remember most of my instructors, and Captain Marino. I remember I remember the good with the bad. I remember those who could run us into the ground, and those that we could run into the ground. And it got to be a game after a little while, but by the time we graduated, we were just the top of the heap. We were only second lieutenants, but my God, were we good. And we maintained, we stayed in touch most of the way, and we're very, very proud of all of our accomplishments.
So when you graduated as a second lieutenant, how did your duties change?
Changed pretty drastically. That's a great question, because I went from a combat engineer, and while you're still in OCS, you fill out what's called a dream sheet. You put your first, your second, and your third choices of where you want to be transferred upon graduation on your dream sheet. My dream sheet, first, second, and third choices was combat engineers, and combat engineers. So for all of my sins, the military sent me to the infantry. I don't know why. They probably needed infantry officers, but I had no desire to go to the infantry, and I have no desire to ever tell anyone that I was a combat engineer, because the infantry is the only branch in the United States Army, and all the other branches just support the infantry. I was sent to a little armory up in the northwest corner of the state in Torrington. It's no longer there. It's run by the city Park and Rec department right now. But it was a beautiful little armory. It looked like a castle with the turrets on the four corners. They were all built about the same time, between 1908 and 1916. There were about a half a dozen of these all over the state. I was sent to Torrington. I was a young kid. I was commissioned at either 22 or 23, and I'm standing in front of my first infantry platoon, and these are all Vietnam vets, and they're twice my age and twice as smart, and they gave me the respect but I had to earn that respect, and it took quite a while to earn that respect. But they were part of the good old boy club. I learned from them. They learned from me. And I learned because I was in their boots at one point. So, and I became part of the platoon, and it was a great experience for me to really those first few years of cutting my teeth and being an infantry officer.
How many years were you in Torrington? How many men were you in Torrington?
I had an infantry platoon of about, an infantry platoon full strength at the time was about 40, and I had between 25 and 30 in my platoon. And I was in Torrington. I stayed there from 81 through 86, went through the ranks of platoon leader, and then I was promoted as a first lieutenant after 3 years into the rank of executive officer, and I stayed as an executive officer for a couple of years. And then after I returned from the infantry officer advanced course at Fort Benning, I went back to Torrington as an executive officer for about a year, and I was offered a command in the same brigade, but out of the battalion. I was in the 2nd Battalion, 102nd Infantry, and I was offered a company command, in the 1st Battalion, 169th Infantry, right here in good old New Britain, Connecticut. I jumped at the opportunity to command an infantry company.
What year was that, Tom?
In 1987.
Go back to your infantry officer advanced training at Fort Benning. What was that like? Was that a lot different than the OCS?
Yeah, it certainly was. It was, in a lot of respects, it was the same, but in OCS, you're taught to be a platoon leader, to run a platoon of 40 plus personnel. In the infantry officer advanced course, you're taught to run a company, and you're taught battalion operations. You're always working one level above your capabilities. So you're taught to be a battalion staff officer, and you're also taught to run an infantry company of 150 men. So when I first got to New Britain, Company A, 1st Battalion, 169th, I had a company of about 100 soldiers. And I always refer to it as the most diverse company in the United States Army, because we were about 30% African American, 30% Hispanic, and 30% white. And I dare anybody to find a more diverse unit in the United States Army, but we worked very, very well together as a team.
As a company commander, how long did you stay in that position, and what were your duties?
Duties were anything and everything. To run and mentor a platoon, 4 platoons of 3 platoon leaders I was mentoring at the time, and 1 mortar platoon leader I was mentoring at the time, to ensure that these folks are progressing through the ranks like I progressed through the ranks. So it was difficult, and back at the time we were responsible for our own recruiting and retention as well. We had recruiters assigned to the unit, but you were always under the gun from higher headquarters, from battalion command, and from brigade command because an infantry company has so much attrition in it. It's very important to continue to feed the company. We'd lose about a platoon a year and gain about a platoon a year through normal attrition. So recruiting is always in the back of your mind, and just making these. Keep in mind, this is the Cold War. This is the end of the Cold War, the beginning of the Reagan era, and at this point we started to see our first new equipment coming into the National Guard. So we're transitioning from that Vietnam mindset, that Vietnam garbage equipment, and we're transitioning into getting new equipment right off of the assembly line. This is totally unheard of in the late 80s, to get new individual gear and new company gear. So we're the first to receive the brand new Humvees. We're the first to receive brand new upgraded weapons and equipment, going through a transition from Vietnam era equipment and Vietnam era tactics to new tactics at this point. So a pretty exciting time to be a leader in, even if it is the National Guard, and I slap myself for saying that, but we were as good, if not better, than a lot of the active duty units that we trained with at the time.
How long were you the company commander in New Britain?
87 to 89, a little bit over 2 years. And in 1989, I was transitioning to a battalion headquarters job, and the job was called the administrative officer for the 1st Battalion, 169th Infantry in Manchester. So I transitioned from company command to administrative officer, and my duties there included running a full-time battalion staff, running a full-time battalion and company staff that were reporting to me on a regular basis, on a Monday through Friday basis at the battalion level. So as an administrative officer, I have it's called an M-Day job. I was the training officer, and I was an S1 personnel officer at the same time that I was the Monday through Friday administrative officer.
So you were there every day?
Yes, I was AGR at the time. Active Guard and Reserve, Monday you know, 24/7. I was an active duty soldier.
When did you go from becoming National Guard, where you were weekend and 2 weeks, to AGR?
I first started, before I went to the 1st Battalion, 169th, I was a training officer. I was assessed into the AGR program in 1986 as a training officer for the 2nd Battalion, 102nd Infantry in Meriden, Connecticut. And that was a BCB. It was called a Battalion Cadre Base. So I was there for a while. I was still a company commander for a while. I was in transition to a lot of different things at the time.
Now, how does that work with the National Guard when you become AGR? Are you still considered National Guard, or are you considered active duty?
Great question. Because you're considered Title 32 active duty. Active duty soldiers are Title 10, United States Code 502. Title 10 is you work for one guy, the President of the United States of America. As a Title 32 soldier, you're active duty, but you work for two folks, two big dogs. The President of the United States of America, as well as the Governor of the state of Connecticut. You could be transferred anywhere within the borders of Connecticut, although you're active duty. You work first and foremost for the Governor of the state of Connecticut. You're on the hook to be federalized in a Title 10 status, which is what happened to us every time we became federal. We sent troops to federal conflicts.
Why did you decide to go AGR? Did you want to make the Army your career at that point?
Yeah, it pretty much was my career at that point. I was working sporadically in the construction business, but when you are in training in residence, your training lasts from a period of 4 to 6 months. And then I was offered, when I was off training from Fort Benning on active duty, I was offered, it was called ADSW, Active Duty Special Work, which is active duty in a part-time status with headquarters, Connecticut Army National Guard. So I was doing a 1,000 different things at the same time. I was a TAC officer at the Connecticut Military Academy. I was a training officer at the Connecticut Military Academy, training people through OCS at the time. I was an assistant training officer at G3 at the Training and Operations Branch in the Connecticut Army National Guard in Hartford. All of this is happening right around that period from 85 through 1990, 1991. So it was a lot of different jobs, a lot of different statuses at the same time altogether.
Wow. You went to Manchester in 89. How long were you there?
Probably a year and a half. And then from Manchester, I was transferred to the training officer for our higher headquarters, which was the 43rd Infantry Brigade, then stationed at Brainerd Field, Brainerd Airport at the Armory. And that was the brigade that was in charge of the 6 Battalion Brigade. 3 infantry battalions, the first of the 102nd, 2nd of the 102nd, 1st of the 169th, the 2nd Battalion, 102nd BCB, a Forward Support Battalion, 143rd Forward Support Battalion, and an Aviation Battalion, 2nd Battalion of the 126th Aviation, and the Battalion of Artillery, 2nd Battalion, 192nd Field Artillery, and I think that is 6 battalions of our brigade.
So you were the
training
in
officer.
charge of all those 6 battalions?
No, I was the training officer, and I had a higher headquarters staff over me, and I had a Brigade S3 training operations officer that was over me as well. I just did it full time.
As a training officer, what were your responsibilities there?
I was responsible for all the training. I had a training team, And we had daily contact we had counterparts in all of those 6 battalions that I just mentioned. They all had training officers, so they would report to me as the full-time training officer. Primarily concerned with getting these units to an annual training site once, twice, 3 times or more a year. And then we're responsible for setting up long range, which was, we had a 5-year training plan, near-term training plan, which was up to 2 years out, and then short-range training, which was 90 days out to 1 year. We're responsible for all of those training plans.
Wow. And you did that for how long?
I'd say a couple of years. In most of I'll be providing you after this with a detailed resume. And as an officer, we were very used to being transferred. As an AGR officer, we were very used to being transferred about every year and a half or about every 2 years. So there's a lot of different jobs that go with all of these duties and responsibilities that I'm telling you about today.
Wow. Where did you go after Brainerd?
Probably to the state headquarters. I stayed at Brainerd through 90 and 91 through Saddam Hussein's first invasion of Kuwait. And we were put on standby as a brigade that we were going to be mobilized very, very shortly.
What was that like? Where were you when you heard about the invasion?
Yeah, I was actually on leave with my wife, and we were someplace in, I think, Maine or New Hampshire when it came over the radio, or we turned on TV one morning and we saw in August of 1990 all of the Iraqi vehicles crossing the border into Kuwait. There was an immediate recall, and we had no idea what was happening at the time, only that the QRF was activated. The Ready Brigade of the 82nd Airborne flew over immediately into Kuwait, and the big buildup began, which included a lot of Connecticut Army National Guard units and Connecticut Air National Guard units. So I was involved in that. From August of 1990 through the shooting war, which began in February of 1991. But we were involved in preparing units for war and training units and getting units ready to ship off.
At that point, do you remember what you were thinking? Did you think that we would be going to
Absolutely.
war?
Absolutely, we would be going to war. We had already sent off several Guard units, none in my brigade yet. But we, as infantry officers, we were chomping at the bit. Send me now. And a few of us approached our brigade XO and our brigade commander saying that we wanted to go. Not only did we want to go, we wanted to commit a mortal sin and leave our brigade that was preparing for war, and we wanted to go with other active duty units. We were slapped very, very hard for that, but it didn't change the way that we thought, because we didn't know how short the war would be. No one guessed that it would be a 100-hour ground war. No one guessed that. But we just wanted to get in it before it was over.
When you were denied, then you continued getting your men
absolutely
prepared to go to war.
Yes.
At that point, it's very critical that their training is top-notch.
Yes, and we were on standby within the division. The brigade was on standby within our division. It was the 43rd Brigade, 26th Yankee Infantry Division at the time, and we were preparing to go in the early part of 1991. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and as right after the February-March timeframe, we started everything that we did in reverse to get these units back and to make sure that all the personnel and equipment were accounted for.
At that point, when that action was completed, did you feel that this was the end of war for the United States, or did you guys know then that we were going back?
No, not even close. In fact, our feet never touched the ground throughout the 1990s. Because this was followed by, the bastards weren't going away. We just kicked them across the border. This was followed by Operation Earnest Will, escorting the tankers. This was followed by Operation Deny Flight, which we provided air assets to ensure that they were keeping their helicopters on the ground and their jets on the ground, and trying to protect the Kurds in the north and the rest of the Shia population to the west, out in Anbar province, and to the south. So, and then right after this, Kosovo started, which was a shooting war. And
were you involved in that?
No, we were involved in training for it and preparing units to go to Kosovo, potentially go to Kosovo. But Kosovo was handled. Clinton was the president of the time, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs thought that, and the president and the SecDef thought that Kosovo could be handled through air power alone. And we found out real fast that it couldn't be. And that was our first real exposure to Christians killing Muslims. And right after Kosovo was Bosnia, and we started to train, prepare, and equip units to go to Bosnia, which was called S4. Stabilization Forces 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through whatever it was. I think it ended with S4 14, S4 15. About 6 years, 6-month deployments of National Guard troops and active duty troops used as a buffer, keeping the Christians from killing the Muslims.
Now, did you deploy to Bosnia?
I trained a unit to go to Bosnia. I was a battalion commander. At the time, I had the distinct pleasure of commanding the 1st Battalion, 102nd Infantry, the nation's 4th oldest regiment in the United States Army, first formed in 1636. 150 years before we were a United States of America, we had a infantry regiment in New Haven County to protect against the Pequot Indian raids. We were preceded by the first 3 regiments in the United States, which eventually became regiments in the United States Army. The North, South, and East. Please stop, please.
As the battalion commander, then, you stayed in Connecticut and you sent a unit to Bosnia?
That's correct. Yeah, we sent a unit out of our Bravo Company, 102nd Infantry in Manchester at the time. And we trained as a battalion in something that we had never trained before. And it was so difficult to turn these snake eaters, to turn these, these trained killers, they're very, very good at what we do for a living, to turn them into peacekeepers. And to, for the next 20 plus years, you want these same soldiers to flip a switch from killing to peacekeeping, and it's very, very difficult to do. It's probably one of the hardest things that anyone has ever done in this profession. And there's been books written about this, there's been studies written about this on just how difficult it is. So we trained as a battalion to send soldiers to become peacekeepers, as well as people that can flip this switch and to keep the Muslims from killing the Christians and the Christians from killing the Muslims. And I had the opportunity to go to Tuzla, Bosnia, to see the fruits of our labor at Eagle Base in Tuzla as part of S4. And then these were only 6-month rotations, but they were invaluable to what was coming next. And we didn't know, we had no idea what was coming next, except that like I said earlier, our feet never hit the ground from Saddam Hussein's first invasion of Kuwait in 1990. And thank God, because that made us the best prepared, best led, best equipped, best trained military that the world has ever seen.
When you went to Eagle Base to see the results of your training, would you say that we were successful in teaching them to be peacekeepers?
Yeah, for the most part. But what we didn't get back then, and what I got in Iraq, was culture. Okay, these Muslims are trying to kill the Christians, but at the time we didn't know that it was a 2,000-year conflict. We didn't know why these people were randomly killing, or we didn't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia and a Kurd. We didn't know the Christian traditions, and in many respects, Christians were worse than the Muslims that we were trying to protect at that point in Bosnia. So we were very good at peacekeeping, but we were very bad at culture. We were very bad at knowing potentially why we're there. Well, we had all the classes, but it wasn't until years and years later that we got very in-depth with these people that we were now living with. We didn't necessarily live with the people that we were protecting in Bosnia. We lived in big bases. We did that in Iraq.
Was that your first culture shock when you went to Camp Eagle?
Yeah. You're not in Kansas anymore. Well, and when you first hear the call to prayer 5 times a day, the imam going up to the tops of the minarets and yelling at the tops of their lungs or in a loudspeaker 5 times a call to prayer. At dawn, after breakfast, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, at dusk, and at evening. And you hear that 5 times, and it becomes a part of your day. And you start to understand that you have so much to be thankful for here in America, but you also realize that it's a big, vast world out there that we'll never understand as Americans, my opinion.
That was a short trip to Bosnia. Then
Yeah.
you came home. What did you continue to do from there?
Yeah, train. Get this unit back from Bosnia in one piece. Continue to train other units going out the door for the next rotations of S4, stabilization forces. And during one of these training rotations is when the towers came down in 9/11.
Where were you?
A story within a story within a story. I had progressed from battalion command, and I was named as I did a couple of tours as a training officer in the Connecticut Army National Guard at the state level. But I was a very good friend of mine was named as the chief of staff. He was a mentor to us all. He was a legend. His name was Steve Corden. He was a colonel. And he raised all of us as
Steve Corden?
Cordon, Stephen. He was stricken with brain cancer. He was named the chief of staff for one of the outgoing chiefs of staff for the Connecticut Army National Guard, and he was stricken with brain cancer. And I was brought to the state headquarters as the state administrative officer, and I would be doing many of the duties while he was recuperating as the chief of staff. Unfortunately, he didn't make it, and he got a good prognosis after surgery. And I had been in the job as the chief of staff for several months, but they got most of the cancer, and it came back, and it came back with a vengeance. And this best friend to us all took his own life because his father died his father was a 3-war veteran, and he watched his father die of brain cancer as well. And he told me, Tom, I'm not going out that way. So, and I guess we weren't surprised when he took his life, but it was a shock to all of us. It was a shock to me especially because I was named as a lieutenant colonel, a junior officer. I was named as the Connecticut Army National Guard Chief of Staff, a 4,000-man organization.
What year was that, Tom?
In 1999.
So that's what your position was when the towers came down?
Yes. I was at my desk. It was a beautiful September day. The aviators call it severe clear because there's not a cloud in the sky. It's blue skies. And I was at my desk. It was about just doing regular chief of staff stuff. And it was about a little after 9 when I got a call from our emergency operations center that was in the basement of it still is in the basement of the Hartford Armory, that they got a call from the Gold Building in Hartford, and they wanted to know if it would be prudent for them to evacuate. Number one, I didn't know what the hell was going on at that point. And I called the emergency, and I said, what the hell is going on? And I was told by our emergency operations center that there were reports that a small plane had hit the World Trade Center. Now, when I think of a small plane, I think of a Cessna or single prop-driven plane, single engine. And I had no idea. So I told the emergency operation, fire up the big screen TVs and let's tune into the news. Let's see what the hell is going on. Then you could say that at that point on, our lives were changed forever and ever and ever. The shit hit the fan in all directions at the same time. I was my adjutant general was on the road that day attending a graduation ceremony or at one of the state universities. He was out and about. As it turned out, the assistant adjutant general, 1-star general, was out of the state. And I was the ranking officer in the building at that time, and everyone was trying to converge on the emergency operations center at the same time. I ran downstairs. I saw the after effects I saw tower number 1 and the smoke coming out of tower number 1. I was told that the governor actually beat me to the emergency operations center, and it was until he was trying to converge all of his deputies and commissioners, and for a while in the emergency operations center, it was just me and the governor. I think his chief of staff was there, but doing other things with the state police. It was Governor John Rowland. So I was standing next to him when we saw the second plane hit the tower, and I was also standing next to the governor when the towers collapsed. And when I say our lives changed forever and ever and ever. And I think we all knew it at that point. We knew it wasn't a small plane that hit tower number 1, and we knew that it wasn't an accidental, because accident was used for tower number 1 for about until he hit tower number 2, probably 20 or so minutes. So I was standing next to the governor, and I watched the governor put his head in his hands. And at that point, everyone knew that our lives wouldn't be.
As a military man and
the same.
the ranking officer in the building, what were your thoughts of what needed to be done right then?
Number one, we have this team of unbelievable professionals, and our job was to convene as a staff, get guidance from our commander-in-chief, the governor at the time, but also we knew what we had to do as professional soldiers, protect our infrastructure. the word was coming in about the Pentagon being hit at the same time. And then shortly after that, word was coming in from Shanksville, Pennsylvania, about the plane going down into the farmer's field that we found out that was headed to the Capitol or the White House, or whatever target of opportunity they could get. So, number one, what is the key infrastructure in the state of Connecticut? The defense industries, the industries, or the key infrastructure like dams, like airports, like 2 nuclear facilities, Millstone and Connecticut Yankee. Connecticut Yankee is now inactivated, but it was active at the time. So that was forming QRFs, quick reaction forces, that turned into ONE. It eventually became ONE, which was Operation Noble Eagle. So we had the platoons and companies on active duty, state active duty, to protect key infrastructure within the state of Connecticut. Like I said, dams, airports. We had a platoon walking through airports, fully armed, fully manned and ready, at Bradley and several other in Tweed and New London, several airports at the time, to protect key infrastructure. We also mobilized a battalion under, it was the 192nd MP Battalion that operated throughout the Northeast with key infrastructure. We had a company of soldiers at West Point. We had a company of soldiers at Fort Monmouth. We had a company of soldiers at Fort Dix. And throughout the Northeast corridor, we worked on key infrastructure. And we knew that we would shortly be at war, which we were shortly at war. They started the air campaign several months after that. And we were ramping up to get our airmen first to war with the bombing campaign in Afghanistan first. But after that was over, they were literally out of targets in Afghanistan. And then shortly after that, we started the ground war against Saddam Hussein and the WMD, weapons of mass destruction, which we were told were prevalent throughout Iraq, and we were going into Iraq, and we just waited for our turn to go through the mobilization process. Now, at the time, life goes on, and I was slated for a coveted slot to attend one of the national senior service colleges. I was selected for the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I put in a request to be close to my family. I was sick of traveling at the time. I was sick of being away from my family at the time and traveling all over the place. And I put in, on a whim, I just put in for another senior service college, which was very close to home in Newport, Rhode Island, the Naval War College. And my application was accepted to attend the Naval War College. I began there in July of 2002, and I graduated during the ground war in June of 2003. So we knew we were going, and I knew that I was slated for a major command after that. By the way, it was a tough year because I was a geographic bachelor, meaning that I would spend my weeks up in Newport, Rhode Island, but I would come home on the weekends and see my brand new family. So I tried to spend as much time with them as possible because I knew that I was going to be leaving them for an extended period of time, and I'm glad I did it that way. Newport was a great place to go to college and to earn a master's degree.
You had a wife and children?
And 2 young toddlers. So one was born in 99 and the other was born in 97. So
did you know before going to the War College that you'd be going to Iraq?
You would have to be a blind man not to see it coming, because we saw all of the units being ticked off one by one by one by one. The Army had just started its rotation policy through Iraq. So, and we knew that this was going to be a long war. No one really thought that it would be like 90 and 91, a 100-hour war. We kind of hoped it would be, but we certainly didn't foresee what would happen after we conquered Baghdad and entered Baghdad. We thought that the soldiers there would just come home. So I'm at the War College. We start the ground war in March of '03, and then it's followed shortly after by President Bush at the time with his famous speech from the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, mission accomplished, and we thought that all the soldiers were going to be coming home after that. I graduated from War College in June of 2003. I went back to my former position as the Chief of Staff. I only stayed there for a few months, and I was given a group command, the 143rd Area Support Group. There was about 2,300 soldiers and 8 battalions at the time, and we were preparing most of those battalions to go to war, as well as our group headquarters to go to war. And I was in that position for about a year in very intensive training position until my unit was called that following summer.
Maybe 2004?
In July of 2004, and you're going to see it. I guess you're going to have my. I guess you're going to have my journal. I kept a daily journal, but in July of 2004, this little soldier is getting ready to retire, and I start my journal by saying that I'm going to my annual training. My annual training for our group headquarters was at Fort Evans, Massachusetts. And I'm going to my annual training saying that this is my last annual training in uniform, and I'm getting ready to retire. It's been a nice road, and no regrets, and I'm ready to go. As I'm driving, I'm about a day behind my unit, who has already established their training routine up at Fort Evans. As I'm driving up to my unit at Fort Evans, I get a call from the then Chief of Staff, Colonel Mark Russo, who's now Brigadier General Mark Russo and Assistant Adjutant General. But he called me, and he said, "Hey, Tom, where are you?" And I said, "I'm right outside the main gates of Fort Evans." And he says, "You might want to pull over." So I pull over. I guess I'm not surprised, but he said that my unit was selected for, I forgot the exact words, but my unit was selected for activation in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom in Baghdad. And we had known that we were going to go to war. We just didn't know when. And let me tell you, when it hits, it doesn't lessen the shock, especially since I trained for 20 plus years to do what I'm doing. It doesn't lessen that in the least. But your brain snaps into full mobilization mode, and that's what we did as a unit. Full mobilization mode. The first thing I did during the phone conversation was, what's the mission? Because as an area support group, we could go anywhere. We could go to Al Anbar province. We could go in the middle of the desert and push supplies out to the fighting infantry divisions all around us. We could go to, somewhere in Kuwait and do the same thing. We could go to Afghanistan and push men and material and supplies into any theater of operation at that time. But the mission at the time was a brand new mission. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the first thing I did is to switch to full war mode. Is to, number one, get my senior leaders together, who were all majors and lieutenant colonels at the time.
What was your rank at this time?
I was a full colonel, 06. To get my senior leaders together and to tell them that we've been selected for mobilization. And a whole laundry list of things that I needed done within the next 24 hours. This, the whole litany. To pull them out of a classroom where they were training with all the other soldiers at the time, to pull them outside, and then I'm looking for a reaction. And you know it's coming, and you know these guys and gals are good, because you've been together for a long, long time. But to look them all in the eyes, and to see who's going to be with me and who's not going to be with me. And who's going to, first and foremost, get these kids home. Get them over there and get them home. So that's my job as a leader. Then after that, then I give them a not fair amount of time to get their shit together. I probably give them, 3-4 hours, and then I call for a uniformation. And then I call for a uniformation, and to stand in front of everybody and tell them that, your lives will never be the same is pretty traumatic. But I have to say, my leadership, I would not be here today without them. My leadership was just absolutely superb in everything that we had to do. We had to stop training immediately for what we were planning on doing, which was to go out to the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California in the desert, or to go to the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and to train to go to war. All of that's off. We were in full mobilization mode, administrative mobilization, and to make sure that we're prepared to go to war.
How much time did you have to prepare? Did they give you a date that you had to leave?
Yeah. Since we were a headquarters, we were treated a little bit different than a normal unit. We were mostly senior leadership and personnel, so we were given a lot less time to train than a regular, say, infantry company or a regular battalion, who were getting at the time about 3 months of total training. We got about 5 weeks of total training. So, and we were pretty much responsible for training ourselves. Our mission was a brand new concept within the United States Army, and it was called the Joint Area Support Group. We would take the headquarters of our area support group and fall in on service members from all 5 services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. We had Coast Guard in Iraq. I don't know why we had Coast Guard in Iraq, but it was strange to see them. Strange to see naval personnel several hundred miles from the nearest body of water, although we were right on the Tigris River. But the mission was to stand up a United States embassy at the same time we're involved in active combat operations. It's never been done before. Usually the embassy personnel pull into a country after the shooting stops. But as everybody knows, the shooting didn't stop. After we liberated Baghdad, we made a huge mistake by getting rid of the Iraqi army. These are my editorial comments, not for attribution, but 10 years after the fact, we know what we did wrong. So we got rid of a standing Iraqi army that could have been instrumental in helping us, get this country back together. We disarmed them, and shortly after liberating Baghdad, the looting started to happen, and the war between the Shias and the Sunnis, and the war against the infidel invaders happened. So our first introduction to car bombs and mortars, rockets, and direct fire. So our job was to stand up the United States Embassy and support the international zone, formerly known as the Green Zone, in Baghdad. It's about 4.5, 5 square miles of somewhat secure areas that's going to be responsible for housing all of the contractors to rebuild Iraq, responsible for this huge United States Embassy and its 3,500 to 4,000 people, support personnel, as well as the upwards of 25,000 people that live in the international zone, and the United States Army FOBs all around the international zone, which was a FOB is a forward operating base. And we have 5 ways in and 5 ways out. We're responsible for the security and the control of our checkpoints to make sure that this place is safe. And it was fairly safe, except for, there's no checkpoints on mortars and rockets and car bombs and direct fire from directly across the Tigris River, which we would receive on a daily basis. So we were under fire for the entire time that we were there.
Tom, when did you actually go to Iraq? Do you recall the date? Or month and year? Yeah,
a month and year and pretty close to the date. So I'll back up. In July of 2004, we actually started the training. In August and September of 2004, we continued intensive training at Camp Roland at the time down in Niantic. And a lot of this was in administrative checks and balances to make sure that your records are clear. And then on or about the 1st of September in 2004, we loaded buses and we went to our mobilization station, which our mobilization station for the next 5 weeks or 6 weeks was Fort Drum, New York. So what I tell everybody is the Army, in its infinite wisdom, is training soldiers to go to the desert on the Canadian border. And it was cold. So I'll get into it later, but everyone got sick going into Iraq because we were training in a very, very cold environment. And 17 hours later by plane, we land in Kuwait where it's well over 100 degrees and everyone got sick as dogs. But we boarded buses and we went to Fort Drum, New York, a huge mobilization station, and we started our individual and unit mobilization training, as well as training for this thing that no one's ever done before called a Joint Area Support Group. And we had been in touch with the soon-to-be Joint Area Support Group, parts of it over in Iraq, on a daily basis through phone calls and through polycoms, and while we were doing the training up in Fort Drum, New York. So we did the best we could with the limited intelligence and information that we had. We only knew that we were falling in on several organizations currently run by Marines, Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard, and Army, that would soon be run by us in this little group of professionals that was kind of cobbled together in Connecticut that would soon be running the better part of the Iraqi embassy building and the Iraqi infrastructure building in Baghdad, Iraq. So the mobilization is a blur right now. It's covered in my journal. But it's taking this group of part-time professionals and turning them into this group of full-time professionals, and that was our job, and we excelled at that. We came together as a team. We came together as and just biting off into this infrastructure that would soon belong to us, and to make ourselves as professionally competent as we could throughout this whole build-up to the war. We boarded airplanes. I remember that it was well below freezing when we left Fort Drum. And going back to some of the training, the trainers up there were USAR trainers, and they did a great job at trying to get us ready. No one knew. You can't prepare for a mortar, and thankfully I was an infantry officer all my life. I know what a big boom sounds like, but I'd always been on the friendly side of the big booms. You can't prepare for that until you actually go through it. But they had a MOUT site, which is Military Operations on Urban Terrain, MOUT, and they turned that into an Iraqi village. And they had actual Iraqi refugees that they imported to the U.S. to train all over the country, to train soldiers like us on what it was like to come face to face with the culture, the Muslim culture for the first time, and the differences between Sunnis, Kurds, and Shias, and what to do and what not to do, and all of these things that for the first time we went through it, we didn't pay any attention to it. It wasn't a big deal when we're in Bosnia. And now it's a huge deal because it's life and death. So they did a great job with training us. We got on board commercial contracted carriers, and we made the long flight from Fort Drum to Newfoundland, to Germany, to Kuwait in about 17 hours. And then landed in this, you can't describe it until you've been there, but the Lawrence of Arabia desert, the flat pancake desert, the desert of books and movies and, and camels and nothing else. And then we go to another FOB, a forward operating base, where we battle site zero our weapons and make sure all of our equipment is there before we go, quote unquote, over the berm. And you're literally going over the berm because there's a berm that separates Kuwait from Iraq. So we spend about a week, less than a week, maybe the better part of 3 or 4 days in Kuwait doing all this stuff. And trying to become climatized to this weather, because now it's hot. It's about 110 degrees. And I'll never forget when we first landed, first of all, we got lost driving all over the place. Our guides weren't adequate to get us to the FOB. It was called FOB Camp Buring, and then the FOBs outside of Camp Buring were, there was Camp New York and Camp Pennsylvania, and they were named for other U.S. states. But we went to Buring in Kuwait. We had driven around Kuwait for the better part of 6 hours just trying to find out where the hell we were.
Tom, how big was your unit that you went over?
The headquarters section was 83 personnel, and then we would fall in with the other personnel that were waiting from us from all the other sister services. Marines, Army, Air Force, and Navy, and Coast Guard. And so the unit in Iraq eventually became about between 150 and 175 personnel, but our responsibilities were to about life support for about 25,000 personnel. And I was the military mayor of the international zone in Iraq, so it was my responsibility for all the FOBs and for all these personnel. I still run into people today who call me Mr. Mayor, because that's what I was referred to over there. I was the mayor of a city. So we get to Kuwait after driving around for all this time, and it's all we want to do is swipe our card. We have an ID card. You have to swipe it through an electronic swiper, and it actually starts your time clock, your 365 days in Iraq. So we can't wait to swipe our card. So this mess will be over soon in 365 short days. So we swipe our cards, we sit down in the briefing tent. It's about 2,400 hours, and we're being briefed by one of the Army captains or Army majors in Kuwait. Welcome to Kuwait on behalf of the Commanding General, General George Casey. I want to welcome you to the Combat Theater of Operations, and I'll remember three things from, first we do in every military briefing is a safety brief. So we have our safety brief. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a dozen types of snakes in Kuwait. All of them are poisonous. Don't play with the snakes. Number two, don't bring food back from the DFAC. DFAC is the dining facility. Don't bring food back from the DFAC. Because, back to your tents. We have air-conditioned tents, thank God. Because food brings rats, and I will always remember this for the rest of my life. Food brings rats, and rats brings cobras. He didn't say snakes. He said cobras. So now you got my attention. So now I'm thinking of waking up in the morning with shaking out my sleeping bag like I always do and having a cobra fall out of my boots or out of my sleeping bag. I don't want a cobra. I don't want a cobra attached to my ass. I don't want any of this. I don't want anything to do with cobras. Now they have camel spiders over there. We have scorpions, and we have cobras. And the third part of the safety briefing is there's no smoking in the tents. There's no smoking in the tents because our tents are coated in a paraffin kerosene mixture, and if a tent catches fire, they will burn in about 15 to 20 seconds. So you have about 15 to 20 seconds to get out of it. So I'm thinking to myself now my Army, I've been really good to my Army all of these years. Now my Army wants to kill me. And I'm thinking to myself, why are they coating the tents in kerosene and paraffin when it's so, and why are there so many cobras? Why am I so tired? And, why am I going through this? So it's like, it's not going from Fort Drum, New York to a different country. It's like going from Fort Drum, New York to Mars. You can't compare life in the Middle East to anything that you've ever seen before in your life. So our first couple of days there, we're concentrating on killing the enemy and refining our tasks, and part of that is battle site zero, so we have to go to the rifle range. In order to get to the rifle range, we have to drive. In my opinion, the entire country's a rifle range. You can fire in any direction, and it's a desert. Your bullet is going to run out of air before you run out of, before you hit anything. So we have to drive out to a rifle range, and it's called the Udari range. So again, we're in buses at the time, military buses. We're driving forever, and we're lost. We have GPS, but we're still lost. And we find an MP company that's coming in the opposite direction. I don't know how we get lost. There's only two roads in Kuwait. So we get lost. An MP, we flag down the MPs, and we say, we're going to Udari range. And he says, sir, you're doing great. You're where you need to be. He says, you're going to continue down this road for the next 10, 15 minutes, and then you're going to see a dead camel. So, and there's a fork in the road. He says, take a left at the dead camel, and then the range is right down that road for a little while. So slicker than snot, we drive for 10, 15 minutes. There's dead camel. We turn left at the dead camel, and we go to the rifle range. So I'm thinking to myself now, God forbid somebody ever moves the dead camel, because the entire United States Army will not know where to go to battle site zero their weapons. Shortly after that, we board, a few days after that, we board C-130s, and we make this, what I call our Disney World e-ticket ride into Baghdad. flying into Baghdad is an experience unto itself, because you have to go from, if you fly any lower than 10,000 feet, you're going to get a missile up your ass. So you have to fly from, your approach is made from 15,000 feet and corkscrew, and you're probably pulling 5 or 6 Gs at this point, and you're just flat against your jump seat in a C-130. You have to corkscrew, and you have to get on the ground as fast as possible. So you're going from 15,000 feet, corkscrewing all the way down to nothing until you hit the runway. Everyone is ready to blow lunch. It's a horrible, horrible ride, and it's fast, but it's not fast enough. The pilot overshoots the runway. Now, in the C-130, we have to fly back up to above 15,000 feet and do it all over again because we didn't have enough runway to land. So we corkscrew all the way down, and then the planes, at this point, yes, I want to puke. Just get me out of this aircraft, do whatever you can, get me out of this aircraft. And the doors open, and you probably heard it from Vietnam guys, the ramps on the doors open, and the first thing that hits you is the wind, the dust, and the heat. You're in an oven, and you're in an oven for the next year of your life. You're on the runway, and then you beat feet off of the runway, and it's welcome to the war, folks, because we weren't on the ground for very long and we picked up our guides that's going to take us along Route Irish. That's the main route between BIAP, which is Baghdad International Airport, and the international zone in the heart of the city of Baghdad. So you're not there for too long before you start to hear the mortar rounds falling, and you start to hear the car bombs. And the car bomb, the first car bomb, I'm an infantry officer. I know what the explosions sound like, and that was one of the things that really got me through my tour, because I knew, number one, I knew I wasn't going to die. I don't know why I knew I wasn't going to die, but I knew I wasn't going to die. There was a real good chance I was going to be wounded, but I knew I wasn't going to die. But I knew what a mortar round sounded like. I didn't know what a rocket sounded like, but I knew shortly after I got there, I knew what a rocket sounded like. And then I didn't know what a car bomb sounded like, but it's like taking a mortar round on steroids, and it's like 100 times bigger boom. Shortly after we get there and we're driving up Route Irish, we start to hear the booms, and I was in the back seat at the time of the Humvee, and the guys, our escorts bringing us in, were in the front seat, and one turns to the next and says, that was a big one. So they didn't have any reaction to it. It was just that was a big one. And then I'm on the road with guards that are making we're all locked and cocked and making threatening gestures to the Iraqi civilians that are along the route, saying back off, or if a car tries to pull up next to us, you get the warning, back off. Next one you'll get will be for real. And the funny thing that hit me right away was you're making these gestures to women and children. So I'm thinking to myself, well, here's where this ugly American comes in. I know that these people are trying to kill us, and I know that we would be doing the same thing if we had invaders in their country. But those two things, driving into the fob, is the two things that really struck me. Number one, you're not in Kansas anymore, and we're in a no shit war now. You're gesturing that you're going to blow away these women and children if you don't back off, and these explosions that are going to become part of our lives every day are happening now. And then we are delivered into what would be home for the next year in Baghdad, Iraq. And I'm going to take this opportunity. This is going to be part of what's going to be scanned into this interview, but I'm going to take this opportunity just because I love these guys and gals so much. I'm so proud of what they all did. But and the fact that this has never been done before, I don't want to screw up. And the fact that it's been 10 years. So the Joint Area Support Group Central, there were supposed to be 3 Joint Area Support Groups. We were Central. We had a unit guide on, a unit flag with a big C. It had an Area Support Group flag with a big C in the middle. There was supposed to be a Southern Area Support Group down in Kuwait or in Basra, Southern Iraq, and then there was going to be a Northern Area Support Group in Northern Iraq or in Southern Afghanistan. So those 2 never happened. We were the only area support group that was ever stood up. Our mission was to provide administrative and logistical services and coordinate military support to the U.S. Mission Iraq. The U.S. Mission Iraq is the Department of State, the State Department Embassy, U.S. Mission. We manage the international zone, formerly known as the Green Zone, and provide logistical support when appropriate. And that was for us, as well as all the military units there, as well as Department of State units, 3,500 people, as well as the 25,000 residents of the international zone. Provide security oversight within the international zone. Huge. 5 ways in, 5 ways out, and the bad guys are trying to breach our walls every stinking day. Transition the functions incrementally to other agencies, organizations as appropriate. So our mission was we're not going to be there long. Remember, this is going to be a very short war. No one thought that we'd still be at war today, 13 years after the fact. But our job is to not only manage all those facilities that I just talked about, our job is to transition this to the unit that's going to follow us and transition this to an Iraqi government. We're standing up an Iraqi government. We're going to have free and fair elections real soon, only a few months away. We're going to give all this stuff that we're doing, we're going to give this to the Iraqis. And it's going to be great. And the Iraqis are going to run their country for the first time ever in a sort of a democratic way. And we're all going to go home. What we did was we never transitioned it to an Iraqi government. We tried to get them to understand, accept, and to be responsible for some of the things that we were doing. But a lot of our job was to transition this to other State Department agencies and to transition this to the unit that's going to be replacing us. So it never really worked out to what we're really supposed to be doing for a living here.